And Albert Edmonton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I recently posed a question to the Prime Minister regarding abuse and non-compliance under the medical assistance in dying regime. Abuse and non-compliance is not a hypothetical. It is happening, it is well documented, and vulnerable Canadians are falling through the cracks. Quebec's Commission on End-of-Life Care, as well as Ontario's Chief Coroner's Office, identified multiple cases of criminal code non-compliance. Let me repeat that again. Criminal code non-compliance, hardly something that should be taken lightly. In April, a 51-year-old London, Ontario woman accessed Maid after she could not find adequate housing. Her condition was not irremediable as required by law. Last month, the RCMP opened a criminal investigation into the questionable Maid death of an Abbotsford, BC woman who suffered from depression. Then there is the case of Roger Foley, someone who requires 24-hour care. He was pressured to get Maid not once, but at least on 4 occasions. In one case, he recorded a health practitioner pressure him to access Maid because she said that his care was simply too expensive. These cases are alarming and should concern the government. They are drawing international rebuke, including from the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, who expressed serious concerns and called on this government to conduct full investigations and to ensure that there are appropriate safeguards in place to protect vulnerable Canadians. Recently, an article was published in the UK Spectator entitled, "Why is Canada Euthanizing the Poor?" In the face of all of that, I would have thought that the Prime Minister would have expressed some level of concern, some level of compassion in answer to my question. But on the contrary, the Prime Minister engaged in the worst form of politics, claiming that anyone who would raise questions of abuse was, quote unquote, wrapped up in ideology. How insensitive, how beneath the dignity of this place. After all, we are talking about vulnerable Canadians. We are talking about an active criminal investigation into the death of a BC woman as we speak. We're talking about grieving families who've lost loved ones because the law was not followed. And we're talking about vulnerable Canadians who are at risk absent the enforcement of safeguards. So I ask the government again, will they admit what everyone knows to be true, and that is that there are serious abuses and instances of non-compliance putting vulnerable Canadians at risk, and what are they doing about it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General. It's a little bit late, huh?
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to speak about Canada's medical assistance in dying, including the role played by both federal and provincial territorial governments in the Maid regime. As you know, Parliament is responsible for enacting the criminal law, and the provinces and territories are responsible for its enforcement. The federal government has always recognized that Maid is a complex and deeply personal issue. Parliament has enacted a Maid regime that reflects Canada's evolving needs, supports autonomy and freedom of choice, while also protecting those who may be vulnerable. And this is why the Maid law includes stringent eligibility criteria and safeguards within the criminal code. For instance, a person may only receive Maid if their request was made voluntarily without external pressure. Additionally, Maid providers must ensure that 1, the request for Maid was made in writing and was signed by an independent witness. 2, the person was informed that they may withdraw their request at any time. 3, a second independent physician or nurse practitioner provided a written opinion confirming the person meets the eligibility criteria. And 4th, the person was given the opportunity to withdraw their request, and if not withdrawn, the person gave their express consent immediately before Maid was provided. The Criminal Code also contains additional safeguards for persons whose death is not reasonably foreseeable. For example, at least one physician or nurse practitioner assessing eligibility must have expertise in the condition causing the person suffering. There must be 90 days between the eligibility is assessed and the day Maid is provided, and the person must be informed of the means available to relieve their suffering, including counseling services, mental health and disability support services, community services, and palliative care. As I mentioned, Madam Speaker, the provinces and territories are responsible for enforcing the criminal law, including the Maid provisions. They're also responsible for the provision of healthcare for the regulated medical professionals in their jurisdictions. The Criminal Code provides the needed safeguards to protect the vulnerable. However, it is up to the provinces and territories to investigate and enforce situations where practitioners may not have followed the safeguards. Finally, Madam Speaker, the Criminal Code regulations for the monitoring of Maid are being updated to ensure that information is collected regarding race, Indigenous identity, and disability. Once available, this information will provide better insights into how certain groups may be impacted by our Maid regime and will support the provinces and territories in the implementation of Maid and its enforcement. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Despite empty words of concern, this government has simply washed its hands clean of issues of non-compliance. Non-compliance with so-called safeguards that were brought in by this government. These are matters under the Criminal Code. They fall within the jurisdiction of this government, and this government has a responsibility to ensure that safeguards are adequate and that vulnerable Canadians are not falling through the cracks under the Maid regime. Instead, this government has plowed full steam ahead, seeking to rapidly expand Maid as vulnerable Canadians fall through the cracks. I would submit that if anyone is wrapped up in ideology, it is this government at the expense of vulnerable Canadians. I listed a series of cases of non-compliance, and I would ask the Parliamentary Secretary to acknowledge that there are instances of non-compliance and to provide a better answer than...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the federal government acknowledges that there are many complexities surrounding Maid and the necessity to protect vulnerable persons. This is why any federal action in this area is informed by evidence, experts, and independent reviews. For instance, as members are aware, adults whose sole medical condition is a mental disorder will be eligible for Maid in March of 2023. In preparation for this, and to ensure that such an expansion is done safely, the government is considering the expert panel on Maid and mental illnesses final report, which was tabled in Parliament on May 13th, 2022. The government is also looking forward to considering the Special Joint Committee on Maid's review of the Criminal Code provisions and their application, as well as other important issues relating to mature minors, advance requests, mental disorders, the state of palliative care in Canada, and the protection of Canadians with disabilities. Thank you, Madam Speaker.